Welcome! This is day 3 of the Hispanic Leadership Summit 2020. Over the last 2 days, we have learned data, insights, and trends. We understood where do we fit within the global framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. We have heard from incredible leaders about the efforts that they are doing. We have gone deeper into the areas of understanding our barriers and structural barriers, and we came to an agreement about what we could do to move the needle together, whether you're in a company, in the creative industry, in the media, whether you're an individual. We have a plan. And now it is time to start looking at how not only we implement that plan, but how do we change our perception? How do we get to those positions of power where we need to be? How do we add seniority? This is going to be a full day looking at changing perception and how frameworks like the Hispanic Star can be useful for all. But to kick it off, my dear friend, Jesus Mantas, Senior Managing Director at IBM, is going to share an incredible research he did combined with the results of a jam session that we did together, listening to the voices of thousands of people about what's important for them at the workplace. How do we get to leadership? What are the place of Latinas in the workplace? And how do we actually get understanding of how to move forward? Jesus Mantas, take it away.
Hello, I'm Jesus Mantas, Senior Managing Partner with IBM Services. Over the past few months, the IBM Institute for Business Value has surveyed over 1,200 Hispanics across the US, and we hosted a large digital Hispanic Jam session, the largest ever, we believe, a 33-hour event that was attended by over 1,000 people interactively commenting on Hispanic topics. The reason why I engage in this study and the reason why we engage in this jam is because I would like to move us, as all of us, the Hispanic leaders, from knowing that there are gaps to doing something about it. When we gather in September, I mentioned that we in the Hispanic community face a significant disconnect. We make up 18% of the US population. We contribute disproportionately to the US economy, generating nearly half of the jobs in the last decade. And we're holding the country together now on the back of many Hispanics, frontline, logistics, retail, and service workers during the COVID-19 pandemic. And despite all of this, in the US, Hispanics only make up 4% of senior leadership positions. That figure is not acceptable. We know that. Organizations know that. And most wish to do better. But you see, knowing something and doing something about it are two different commitment levels. A wish is not a plan. So it is with that spirit that I want to focus our time together today to discuss 3 key gaps that we as leaders of the Hispanic and Latino communities need to pay attention to. And these gaps were illustrated and came from this study that the Institute of Business Value did and the Hispanic Jam that we held. The first of those gaps has to do with mentoring. We've all heard that mentoring, that message is loud and clear. And most of us are mentoring others right now. That's good, and it's effective, but it's not enough. Somebody crisply put it in the jam that Hispanics are over-mentored and under-sponsored. The difference? Mentors talk to you, but sponsors talk about you. Active advocacy at scale is what I believe is the missing action here. We need sponsors who will step up and engage others on behalf of Hispanic professionals, especially younger professionals. That is what will move the needle of performance. So that's gap number 1. The second has to do with oversimplification of our Hispanic and Latino communities. You see, our Hispanic and Latino communities talked about as though if it would be a single block, when in reality, we all know it's massively diverse. Anyone with close understanding of the Hispanic and Latino communities in the US recognizes that there are big differences in cultural values, in origin, and in backgrounds as many as there are many different life experiences. Yet, if you look at most of the programs, you never know about it. You never know about it by looking at the average organization's approach to Hispanic diversity and inclusion. We tend to treat Hispanics as a homogeneous group, when we should be personalizing the outreach and the actions based on the different needs, perceptions, and aspirations on these different clusters. In the Jam, our friend Dr. Robert Rodriguez helped us get a more actionable point of view and framework about this by describing what he calls the 4 Latino archetypes. The invisible Latino are the people that choose to downplay the Hispanic heritage at work because they want to cover for it, or they don't feel it's relevant, or they prefer not to be labeled. The equivocal Latino are these individuals that, for them, expressing their Hispanic identity is situational. Sometimes they lean into it when they're with other Latinos, but then sometimes they minimize or conceal it in other contexts. The retro Latino, as he calls it, these individuals have a strong desire to reconnect with their Hispanic roots. They may have not leaned into their Latino identity in the past, but they want to do so now. They really feel the call to do it right now. And then, fourth, the unapologetic Latino. These are individuals who they see the Hispanic identity as an asset, as a source of strength. They acknowledge it and they celebrate. So think about that. These are 2 very different personas, 2 very different aspirations, 2 very, very different ways to act, to think, to feel, and to say things. So the empathy maps of these personas, they happen all to be Latinos, but they need to be considered when we are creating outreach and programs. And that is the call to action, is we really need to make sure that as we are creating programs, we don't create homogeneous Hispanic or Latino programs. We need to personalize to the people underneath, one level down, to make these programs a lot more effective, because different Hispanics and different Latinos will react differently to these same programs. And then the third gap, and the most troubling gap in my view, is that I've learned to see all the data now and put it all together and see that we're really failing the Latinas in our community. It's what I call the gap inside the gap. We're all familiar with the fact that Latinas are a dominant entrepreneurial force. They run 44% of all Latino businesses. And if you look at last decade, they drove nearly half the growth of the new Latino businesses. And we also are aware in the US, and frankly, it's a global phenomenon, about the gender gap and the gender wage gap. So when you look at Latinas have a double gap. They're penalized because they're Hispanics or Latinas, and they're penalized again because they're women. So when you put it all together, on average, Latinas in the US are paid 45% less than equivalent white men and 30% less than equivalent white women. And to be clear, Latinas are the ethnic group that are paid the lowest with respect to other women. So they make them the lowest earning female group among females. So put it in perspective. Let me just give you a framing. A Latina has to work 23 months in the same job to make the same money than a white man would earn in 12 months in that same job. 23 months to 12 months, same job, just because they would be Latinas on average. So what are we going to do? These are the 3 issues that in our study, in our Jam, they're very clear. They're very obvious. The insights are there, but what are we going to do about it, right? So we asked, one of the polls in the Jam was, do we believe that business executives are doing enough to pave the way for the success of the next generation of Hispanic leaders? May not be a surprise to you. 83% of all of the Jam attendants said, no, we're not doing enough. That's sobering. And when I say we are not doing enough, I actually mean it. We are not doing enough. I think it has to start with us, the Hispanic leadership community. It should start with us in the way that we apply to ourselves, and therefore we can expand that to others. So I'd like you to do something with me right now on each one of these three gaps. So on the first gap, over mentoring, under sponsoring. Take a piece of paper or pull out your phone right now and write down how many people are you mentoring today. And then next to it, write the names of the people that you're actively sponsoring into a job, into a round of financing, into a new business. If you're like me, as I did this exercise myself, I noticed these two lists were not balanced. I had a longer list of the people that I was mentoring and a shorter list in the people that, if I'm honest with myself, I was sponsoring. So my request for myself and for all of us, the Hispanic leadership community, is that we take a step to balance these lists. Let's make sure that at least all of us, we are actively sponsoring and advocating for the same number of people that we are mentoring. And then as we do that, let's make sure that in our programs, in our budgets, in our actions, we try to balance those activities: mentorship, sponsorship. Second, on the diversity of Hispanics and Latino communities. Think about your background, your values, your aspirations, and think about the archetypes that Dr. Robert Rodriguez gave us as a framing for this exercise. Find ways to get these archetypes into the programs that you're applying to either your community or any of the Hispanic communities in your organizations, or the diversity and inclusion programs that you sponsor. Just make sure that we are double clicking from the Hispanic and Latino label one down into some of these differentiated archetypes to make sure that these programs are going to be much more effective than otherwise they would be. If they're generic programs, they're going to be, somewhat effective. But if we can double click and go after some of this cultural diversity inside of the Hispanic community, we're going to be significantly more effective in those programs. And then finally, I'd like all of us to commit to being an advocate for Latina advancement. Do you know if there is a pay gap in your organization between Latinas and non-Latinas? If not, maybe find out. Make a point to find out. Are Latina women represented in upper management? Probably not. Then look at those lists: mentorship, advocacy. Let's put more Latinas in the advocacy list. I think the most important thing on this Latina point is that we need to be purposeful. See, success for Latinas, given the significant gap within the gap, is not going to happen by accident. It's not going to happen by osmosis. It's not going to happen by serendipity. If we're going to change that, we're going to have to make it a strategic priority. We're going to have to put special programs on it. We're going to have to define metrics and clear accountability for it. So a small example that I have started this year is to focus one of my activities is I'm an active Hispanic angel investor. And I've focused that fund on investing in businesses run by Latinas. And just to be clear, my reason for doing that is not driven by charity. It's driven entirely by a better business decision, because I know that most Latina CEOs will outperform their peers in running their businesses. So as I do with my own investing, I think all of us should be doing with our organizations and with our programs, and not doing because we are, doing charity, but doing it because we're going to create a better performance for those businesses, for those units. And with that, we're going to balance the equation that is clearly not balanced for Latinas. So hope that this is clear. Hope that these messages are not only insightful from the Jam and the study that is being launched this week, but also they're actionable. Thank you for engaging with me on this. I hope that you will join me in moving from wishes to plans, accountability to actions, and I'm looking forward to see everyone here in the journey and be working with you in this journey. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jesus. That's incredible. Such an important insight, how to get Hispanics into leadership positions. It's almost like the book, The 7 Threats to Get into Leadership, isn't it? I am so proud to have IBM as a founding partner. Thank you so much. We're not going to stop until every child, every school, everyone knows that Hispanics are contributors to the country. It's enough to be invisible. It's enough to be seen as someone we're not. And so when you are like me, a marketer, and you've been working your entire life to highlight the attributes of whatever you're doing, in my case, I was working on poverty or children and so on, so that you highlight them to bring the hearts and the minds of people to follow you. When you look at the Hispanic community, you say, well, whomever is doing the marketing of the Hispanic community is doing everything possible to hide our attributes, to present us as someone we're not. So I started wondering, who is working on perception? Actually, where is perception created? And can we actually go to the source and start changing that perception source so that we can change perception? And so what I started doing with my team in a very archaic and artisanal way is to map it out, to start looking, where is perception created? What creates perception? We understand how it impacts us. We understand how it is in certain industries. We understand where we are. But what creates perception? So after a lot of research, we decided to bucket in three different, to group it in three different buckets. The number one is arts and entertainment. Everything that we see from shows, television, everything that comes through fashion, and everything that is modeling actually our perception of what it is, the identity of someone or a group. The number two thing that we thought could be a good group to gather and this information is news and current affairs. How are we seeing in the news? What kind of things are reported about someone? What do you read in magazine, in newspapers, in radio? What are people saying or happening? And the third bucket was community and corporate environments. So the kinds of sports, the sports clubs, the churches, the employee resource groups that we find in corporations, what your employee tells you, what your employer tells you. So that might not be a perfect framework, but that was the framework we found to start mapping perception. Perception is created in the brain, and the brain gets information from three main sources: arts and entertainment, news and current events, and community and corporate environments. And then we started looking at, in each of any one of them, which organizations, which Hispanic leaders are working to change the perception or to change the way in which we're perceived in each and every one of them. So in arts and entertainment, we went to Hollywood, and then we went to television, and then we started looking at fashion and photography and so on. And we started mapping out who is doing what. And do they have a specific goal, something that is measurable, that we can see? And here is the map. We have the map. It might not be perfect. We need your help to pop it up, of organizations, individuals, advocacy groups that are trying to address certain areas. Whether you're the Latino Donor Collaborative and you have data provision that can educate people, and whether you have as a goal to have more Latino leaders in films, whether you are Eva Longoria and you work with LA Collab with Beatriz Acevedo and your goal is to double the amount of Hispanics in Hollywood, whether we have groups like AIM of ANA trying to provide methodology and a measurement system to understand what is good for companies when you put diversity in front of the camera. We try to map as much as we can. And guess what? We realized that we are very concentrated in certain areas and we have gaps in certain areas. So this is a perfect opportunity for all of us to say, who wants to do more? Who can actually work on schools so that we can go into schools and educate everyone about Latinos being a contributor force to the country? Who can actually start bringing more Hispanic heroes to schools and churches? How do we fill those gaps? And the question then it was like, When we are acting, when we are, for example, in Hollywood, when we have so many players on the space trying to say, like John Leguizamo wants to create content to educate us all, or trying to get money to create more content about Hispanics and put more Hispanic content on the agenda, are we talking? Are we connecting the dots? Are we in the know about how are we intelligently going to take this mapping and know how are we going to coordinate it, united, join forces to change our perception? So this is the beginning. This is by no means the end work, but we have to start somewhere, and this is an offer. What we're going to be seeing all across the next sessions is how do we connect the dots? Which industries do we have to tap into? We would like to hear from you. Give us your opinion. Do you know someone that is working somewhere that we can bring together? Do you have the desire to join forces and do something together? Who else and what else can we do so that we can change the perception of our community? It is our perception. It is our community. Perception is reality. So let's make our reality a good one. Today, we're going to be talking about all of the issues that perception affects. How are we going to change it? Who is working on what? And what do we do together to really make a change so that we can be moving the needle from invisible to visible, from negative to positive, and from takers to makers? To kick off this, my dear friend Stacy de Armas from Nielsen is going to share with us an incredible work she's doing on inclusive indexing.
Hola, my name is Stacy de Armas, and I'm Senior Vice President of Diverse Insights and Initiatives at Nielsen. At Nielsen, we are committed to counting every voice and ensuring that no group is left underrepresented. At the same time, we know who we see and what we see on TV is as important as the audience viewing it. As the U.S. continues to diversify, we knew at Nielsen that we needed to do more to support the entertainment industry as it worked to address and improve diversity and inclusion. From Oscars So White and beyond, the calls have been loud to see more of our society reflected in what we see on TV. So we started asking ourselves some questions. Are diverse people represented well on screen? Are the stories being told our stories? And do we see ourselves on screen? And how do we see ourselves? Doctors, lawyers, politicians. And from all of that content, who do our kids have permission to become from watching themselves on TV? We recognized that at Nielsen, we had a responsibility to help the industry answer these questions. And there was a significant way we could contribute to this conversation. So with some of the best minds in data engineering and tech, we developed a new way to shift our lens and look at on-screen representation of talent for the first time. Additionally, we looked at the themes in which people are present on screen. This latest piece of work is called Being Seen on Screen, and it aims to support the industry in its journey to diversification. But we also explore the value of being seen by the themes that are present within the content where diverse people are. So simply put, what do we see when we see ourselves on screen? And we learned so much about so many groups, but we're going to focus for a minute on our community, the Latino community. While TV content today looks and feels more diverse than ever, we still found that representation on TV programming is low for multiple identity groups across all media. And Hispanic Latino are consistently and significantly underrepresented across all platforms, with just a 5.5% representation when we know we make up 19% of the population. Our visibility is actually less than 1/3 of our presence in society. And Latinas are among the least represented of all women for every intersectional group we measured, when compared to population estimates with just a 2.5% of visibility on screen. That's only about 1/4 of our actual presence in society. And unfortunately, the story's the same when we look at it by platform, whether it was cable, broadcast, or streaming, or by genre, action, drama, news. No single genre or platform represented Latinas or Latinos well at all. We're not present on screen. When we look at the power of television, however, to influence identity as well as policy, we realize the exclusion of Latino stories on screen has impacts beyond just the content we consume. When I'm thinking about the results in the context of some of the major storylines for this year, Latinos are increasing their presence in social media, in Congress, in news cycles. But there's this tremendous opportunity to feature Latinos in television programming and make sure we're seen on screen. At Nielsen, we went on to evaluate how media might play a role in influencing our identities. And this really narrow set of themes that appear consistently in the programming that features Hispanic men and women. We know representation matters, but so does the context in which that representation makes it onto our TV screens. Social scientists agree that the themes and narratives depicted on screen can contribute to identity formation and social perceptions. When Latinos are in the audience and they see Latinos on screen, what themes do we see ourselves in? Well, our research tells us, by looking at the top video descriptors associated with programmings, where Latinos were on screen and in the audience, here's what we saw. We often saw Latinos presented in themes such as dysfunction, intense, emotional, and suspenseful. For Latinas, here are the themes we see when we see ourselves on TV. Dysfunction again, melodramatic, emotional, and police stations. And for our Hispanic men, criminals, police detectives, teamwork, crime scenes. But if I switch gears and take a look at white women, what do they see? They see themselves in themes such as friendship, family, homes, love, and daughters. We saw this over and over again. Television plays an undeniable role in how our perceptions are formed and what we believe is possible. Shows that portray people outside of stereotypes help all of society see who we really are and who we can be. Shows can be educational, and they can help America learn about one another. The first step to creating an inclusive society is for people to feel seen and be seen. The stories told, the characters portrayed, and the experiences shared on screen help people feel empowered and learn about those who are different. Media has this power to build and support a more inclusive narrative for all. Together, let's use the power to break these traditional stereotypes and give voice to underrepresented groups and help society move toward a more inclusive future. You can find all of this information and learn more at nielsen.com/inclusion analytics. Gracias.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jonathan Patton, and I'm the VP of Sales and Partnerships at HCode. I joined the company over 5 years ago with the hope of helping create a future for media and advertising where everyone is authentically represented. I'm proud to say that in just 5 short years, we've been able to execute on that vision, creating a team of over 60 individuals who are dedicated to ensuring that Hispanic stories are being told. Today, we're proud to share with you the results of our latest partnership with the We Are All Human organization. I'd like to thank Claudia and her wonderful team at the We Are All Human organization for their continued support throughout this process. We're so excited to share 3 key findings of our latest report, the Hispanic Perception Study. This summer, we conducted a study unlike any other. We wanted to understand the perceptions of Hispanic Americans, but beyond that, we wanted to examine both how Hispanics saw themselves and how people from other cultures saw them as well. Some of the results were striking. But first, a little bit about how we conducted the study. Through our proprietary HCode Intelligence Center, which is made up of over 5,000 panelists, we examined a subset of over 2,000 individuals. The study was conducted online, where we asked questions to people of all different backgrounds. Questions included everything from general opinions about Hispanics, where we work, what languages we speak at home, what our contributions are, and even what our education levels are. In some cases, people's responses, Hispanic or not, were aligned with census data. And in other cases, they were not. Let's look at the first one. With an estimated of over 56 million Hispanics in the US in 2020, nearly 87% are here legally, according to research from Pew. In fact, just a small portion of the Hispanic population is undocumented. However, when you look at the Hispanic Perception Study results, you'll see that most groups got this wrong. They stated that the number of Hispanics who are here legally is only about 20 to 60%, which is way off from the actual statistics. When it comes to Latinas, we asked an open-ended question. How would you describe them? Top words that came to mind among all groups were beautiful, sexy, and loud. Lastly, we looked at age. According to Pew Research Center, the most common age for Hispanics in the United States is 11 years old. The vast majority of the Hispanic population in the US is not only born here in the country, but are less than 18 years old. According to our survey, most groups are way off of their perceptions and believe they are somewhere between 25 to 44 years old. So what does that mean for all of you? First, we hope to continue to educate people of all backgrounds about the facts, figures, and contributions of Hispanic Americans. We know that in many cases, perceptions shape reality. Let's work together to make sure the truth behind we understand the truth behind the numbers and the culture. Please check out our Hispanic Perception Study out today. Thank you.